The Great Gain of Godliness, a study by Thomas Watson. We are at chapter 8. The godly should meditate on God's name. The second special characteristic of the godly in the text is they thought upon God's name. These saints, when they were together, spoke of God. When they were alone, they thought of God. They thought upon His name. Question: what is meant by God's name? Answer: by the name of God is meant His essence. God's name is put for God Himself. Answer 2: by the name of God is meant His glorious attributes, which are, as it were, the several letters of His name. Answer 3: by the name of God is meant His worship and ordinances. Where His name is called upon, go ye now unto my place, which was in Shiloh, where I set my name at the first. Jeremiah 7 verse 12, that is, where I first set up my public worship. Now this name of God, the saints in the text did contemplate. They thought upon His name. Thoughts are the firstborn of the soul, the conceptions of the mind, the immediate fruit and issue of a rational being. Thoughts are the representations of things in the imagination. These devout souls in the text were chiefly busying their thoughts about God and heaven. It is the inseparable sign of a godly man to employ his chief thoughts about God. The thoughts of the righteous are right. Proverbs 12 verse 5. That is, they are set upon the right object. It is natural to think thoughts fly out of the mind as sparks out of a furnace. The Hebrew word for a thought signifies the boughs of a tree, because thoughts shoot out from our minds as branches do from a tree. It is, I say, natural to think, but it is not natural to think of God. This is proper to a saint. His thoughts are sublime and seraphical. They fly to heaven. The mind is a mint house where thoughts are minted. David minted golden cogitations. I am still with thee. Psalm 139 verse 18. That is, as learned Ainsworth expounds it, by divine contemplation, thoughts are travelers in the soul. David's thoughts kept heaven road. I am continually with thee. Psalm 73 verse 23. As the mariner's needle turns to the North Pole, so a saint's thoughts are still pointing towards God. So question: whence is it that the saints' thoughts amount up to God? Answer 1. There will be this thinking on God from those intrinsic perfections which are in Him. The loveliness of the object attracts the thoughts. God is the supreme good. There's nothing but God worth thinking upon. Thou art my portion, O Lord, Psalm 119 verse 57. Will not a man's thoughts run upon his portion? A gracious soul has found pleasure in thinking on God. Psalm 63 verse 5 and 6. He has had those transfigurations on the mount, those comings in of the Spirit, those enterings of God's love, those pre-libations and foretastes of glory, so that he cannot keep his thoughts off from God. To hinder him from thinking on God is to bar him of all his pleasure. Answer 2. There will be thinking on God from the powerful operations of the Holy Spirit. We cannot of ourselves think a good thought. 2 Corinthians 3 verse 5. But the Spirit elevates and fixes the heart on God. The Spirit lifted me up. Ezekiel 3:14. When you see the iron move upward, you know there has been some magnet drawing it. So when the thoughts move upwards towards God, the Spirit has, as a divine magnet, drawn them. First use is reproof. Out of the quiver of this text I may draw several arrows of reproof. One is, it reproves such as do not think upon God's name. It is the brand mark of a reprobate. God is not in all his thoughts. Psalm 10 verse 4. He endeavors to expunge and blot God out of his mind. Though he draws his breath from God, yet he does not think of him. His thoughts shoot into the earth. Philippians 3 verse 19. Had not sinners by their fall lost their headpiece? They would reason thus with themselves. Certainly God is best worth thinking on. Is there any excellency in the world? Then what is there in God that made it? He gives the star its beauty, the flower its fragrance, food its blessedness. And if there be such deliciousness in the creature, what is in God? He must needs be better than all. O my soul, shall I admire the drop and not the ocean? Shall I think of the workmanship and not of him that made it? This is the fruit of original sin. It has warped the soul and taken it off from the right object. 2. It reproves such as indeed think of God, but who do not have right thoughts of him. As the Lord said to Eliphaz, Ye have not spoken of me the thing that is right. Job 42:7. So some think of God, but they do not think of him, the thing that is right. They have low, unworthy thoughts of God. They fancy God to be like themselves. Psalm 50 verse 21. Men think God is as short-sighted as they are, and that he cannot see them through the thick canopy of the clouds. But he that makes a watch knows all the wheels and pins in it, and the spring which causes the motion. God, who is the inspector of the heart. Acts 1:24 and chapter 15 verse 8. God sees all the intrigues and private cabals in the thoughts. Job 42 verse 2. Amos 4 verse 13. God knows the truth, and God knows the true motion of a false heart. I know and am a witness, saith the Lord. Jeremiah 29 verse 23. Men have injurious thoughts of God. First they deem his ways unequal, Is not my way equal? Ezekiel 18:25. Some call God's providence to the bar of reason, and judge his proceedings eccentric, but God lays righteousness to the plummet. Isaiah 28 verse 17. His ways are secret but always just. God is most in his way when we think he is out of his way. Secondly, they think his ways are not profitable. What profit is it that we have kept his ordinance? Malachi 3:14. We cannot show our earnings. These are not right thoughts of God. Men think him to be a hard master, but God will be in no man's debt. He gives double pay. Neither do ye kindle a fire on my altar for naught. Malachi 1 verse 10. And then point 3. It reproves such as, instead of thinking on God, have their minds wholly taken up with vain thoughts. Vain thoughts are the throth of the brain. How long shall thy vain thoughts lodge within thee? Jeremiah 4:14. I do not deny that vain thoughts may sometimes come into the best hearts. But they have a care to turn them out before night, that they do not lodge. This denominates a wicked man. His thoughts dwell upon vanity, and well may his thoughts be said to be vain, because they do not turn to any profit. Vanity and things wherein there is no profit. Jeremiah 16:19. They are vain thoughts which are about foolish things, and run all into straw. They are vain thoughts which do not better the heart, nor will give one drop of comfort at death. In that very day his thoughts perish. Psalm 146 verse 4. Vain thoughts are pernicious. They taint the heart and leave an ill tincture behind. And point 4, it reproves such as have not only vain thoughts, but vile thoughts. Firstly, proud thoughts, while they view themselves in the mirror of self-love. Well, that's the term of narcissism. They begin to take up venerable thoughts of themselves, and so pride fumes up into their head and makes them giddy. Acts 5 verse 36. Secondly, impure thoughts. They think how to gratify their lust. They make provision, or as the word signifies, become caterers for the flesh. Romans 13 verse 14. Sin begins in the thoughts. First man devises sin, then act it. Micah chapter 2 verse 1 and 2. Sin begins in the thoughts. First man devises sin, then act it. And for instance, if one seeks preferment, he thinks to himself, by what ladder he may climb to honor, he will cringe and comply and lay aside conscience. And this is the way to rise. If a man would grow rich, he sets his thoughts to work how to compass an estate. He will circumvent and pull down his soul to build up an estate. Would he wreak his malice on another? He frames a plan in his thoughts to take away his life, as Jezebel. That painted harlot, when she would ruin Naboth, presently veins a sham plot and subtly thinks of a way how to dispatch him. Proclaim a fast and set Naboth on high among the people, and set two men, sons of Bedial, to witness against him, saying, Thou didst blaspheme God and the king, and carry him out and stone him. 1 Kings 21, verse 9 and 10. O the mischief of thoughts! A man may deny God in his thoughts. The fool hath said in his heart, There is no God. Psalm 14, verse 1. He may commit adultery in his thoughts. Whosoever looks on a woman so to lust after her hath committed adultery with her in his heart. Matthew 5:28. A man may murder another in his thoughts. Whosoever hateth his brother is a murderer. 1 John chapter 3:15. Oh, how much contemplative wickedness is in the world! Tremble at sinful thoughts. We startle at gross sin, but we are not troubled so much for sinful thoughts. Know firstly that sin may be committed in the thoughts, though it never blossom into outward act. The thought of foolishness is sin. Proverbs 24 verse 9. See this illustrated in two things. Envy. The Jews envied Christ. The Jews envied Christ, the fame of his miracles. Pilate knew that for envy they had delivered him. Matthew 27:18. Here was sin committed in the thoughts. The Jews sinned by envying Christ, though they had never crucified him. Discontentment. Cain was wroth, and his countenance fell. Genesis 4 verse 5. He maligned his brother, and his thoughts boiled up to discontentment. Here was sin committed in the thoughts. Cain sinned by being discontented, even if he had never murdered his brother. Know, secondly, that God will punish sinful thoughts. We say thoughts are free, so we say thoughts are free, so they are in man's court. But God will punish for thoughts. It was set upon Herod's score that he thought to destroy Christ under a pretense of worshipping him. Matthew 2 verse 8. So let us be humbled for the sins of our thoughts. If thou hast thought evil, lay thy hand upon thy mouth. Proverbs 30 verse 32. That is, humble and abase yourself before the Lord. The best alive need to be humbled for their thoughts. First, for the instability of their thoughts. How do the thoughts dance up and down in prayer like quicksilver? They will not fix. It is hard to tie two good thoughts together. And secondly, for the impiety of their thoughts. In the fairest fruit may be a worm, and in the best heart evil thoughts may arise. Did men's hearts stand where their faces do, they would blush to look one upon another. So let us, I say, be deeply humbled for our thoughts. Let us look up to Christ, that he would stand between us and God's justice, and that he would intercede for us, that the thoughts of our hearts may be forgiven us. The second use, exhortation. So let us think of God's name. Let us look up ourselves with God every day. Let our thoughts get wings and with the birds of paradise fly up towards heaven. Christians, look upon that day to be lost in which you have not conversed with God in your thoughts. Think of God in your closet, in your shop, trade above the moon. Isaac went out to meditate in the field. Genesis 24, verse 63. He walked in heaven by holy utterances. Our minds should be steeped in holy thoughts. It is not enough to have a few transient thoughts of God by, but there must be a fixing of our minds on God till our hearts are warmed in love to him. And we can say, like those in Luke 24, verse 32, did not our heart burn within us? But what should the matter of our holy meditation be? 1. Think of God's immense being. Adore his illustrations, attributes which are the beams by which the divine nature shines forth. Think of God's omniscience. He particularly and critically assesses all our actions and notes them down in his daybook. Think of God's holiness, which is the most sparkling jewel of his crown. Think of God's mercy. This makes all his other attributes sweet. Holiness without mercy and justice without mercy would be terrible. Think of God's veracity, abundant in truth. Exodus 34, verse 6. That is, God will be so far from coming short of his word that he does more than he has said. He shoots beyond the promise, never short of it. 2. Think of the works of God. I will meditate also of all thy work. Psalm 77, verse 12. God's works are bound up in 3 great volumes: creation, redemption, providence. Here is sweet matter for our thoughts to expatiate upon. To enforce the exhortation, let me propose some arguments and inducements to be frequent in the thoughts of God. The first one is the reason why God has given us a thinking faculty is that we may think on his name. When our thoughts run out in things not pertinent, like water running past a mill, we should think with ourselves thus: did God give us a talent to misemploy? Did he give us thoughts that we should think of everything but him? Were these arrows given us to shoot beside the mark? 2. If we do not accustom ourselves to good thoughts, we cannot be good Christians. Thinking seriously on heavenly things makes them stay in our minds, causes delight in them, and makes them nourish us. Musing on holy objects is like digesting food, which turns it into blood and spirits, so that without holy thoughts there is no religion. Can a man be religious and scarcely ever think of it? Point 3. We are deeply obliged to think on God, for first God is our maker. It is He that hath made us, and not we ourselves. Psalm 100, verse 3. Our bodies are God's curious needlework. Psalm 139:15. And as God has wrought the cabinet, so He has put a jewel in it, the precious soul, as God made us. And shall not we think of Him? Secondly, God has sweetened our lives with various mercies. The city of Syracuse in Sicily was so curiously situated that the sun was never out of sight. God has so placed us by His providence that the sunshine of mercy is never out of sight. We are miraculously attended with mercy. Mercy feeds us with the finest of the wheat, the bread of life. Mercy guards us with the guard of angels. It makes the rock pour forth rivers of oil. And shall not the stream lead us to the fountain? Shall not we think of the God of our mercies? This were high in gratitude. Point 4. To have frequent and devout thoughts of God witnesses sincerity. No truer touchstone of sanctity exists than the spirituality of the thoughts. What a man is, that his thoughts are. For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. Proverbs 23:7. Thoughts are freer from hypocrisy than words. One may speak well for applause or to stand right in the opinion of others, but when we are alone and think of God's name and admire His excellency, this shows the heart to be right. Thoughts are freer from hypocrisy than an unblameable life. Can you say, Lord, our hearts are still mounting up to heaven, our thoughts are lodged in paradise, though we do not see thy face, yet we think on thy name? This is a good evidence of sincerity. We judge men by their actions. God judges them by their thoughts. Point 5. Thinking much on God would cure the love of the world. Great things seem little to him that stands high. To such as stand upon the top of the Alps, the great cities of Italy seem like little villages. For those who are mounted high in the contemplation of Christ and glory, how do the things of the world disappear and even shrink into nothing? The soul elevated by faith above the visible planets has the moon under his feet. A true saint intermeddles with secular affairs more out of necessity than choice. And Paul's thoughts are sublime. He lived in the attitudes and how he scorned the world. So the world is crucified unto me. Galatians 6:14. Point 6. Thinking on God would be expulsive of sin. From whence is impiety but from thoughtlessness? If only men carefully considered God's holiness and justice, would they dare sin at the rate they do? That which kept Joseph in check was the thought of a sin revenging God. When the delights of sin tickle, let the thoughts of God come into man's minds, that he is both spectator and judge, and that after the golden crowns and women's hair come the lion's teeth. Revelations 9 verse 8. This would put them into a cold sweat and be as the angel's drawn sword. Book of Numbers 22 verse 31. It would scare them from sin. Point 7. Thinking on God is an admirable means to increase our love to God as it was with David's meditations on morality and mortality. As I was musing, the fire burned. Psalm 39, verse 3. So it is with our musing on the deity while we are thinking on God. Our hearts will kindle in love to Him. The reason our affections are so chilled and cold in religion is that we do not warm them with the thoughts of God. Hold a magnifying glass to the sun, and the glass burns that which is near to it. So when our thoughts are lifted up to Christ, the Son of righteousness, our affections are set on fire. No sooner had the spouse been thinking upon the Saviour's beauty, but she fell sick of love. Song of Solomon 5 verse 8. O saints, do but let your thoughts dwell upon the love of Christ, who passed by angels and thought of you, who was wounded, that out of his wounds the balm of Gilead might come to heal you, who leaped into the sea of his father's wrath to save you from drowning. Think of this unparalleled love which sets the angels wondering, and see if it will not affect your hearts and cause tears to flow. Point 8. Thinking on God will by degrees transform us into His image, as Jacob's flock, looking on the rods that had white streaks, conceived and brought forth like them. Genesis 39. So by contemplating God's holiness, we are in some measure changed into His likeness, beholding as in a glass the glory of the Lord. We are changed into the same image. 2 Corinthians 3 verse 18. The contemplative side of God was transforming. They had some print of God's holiness upon them, as Moses, when he had been on the mount with God, his face shone. Exodus 34 verse 35. What is godliness but godlikeness? And who are so like Him as those that think on His name? Point 9. Thinking on God is sweet, it ushers in a secret delight to the soul. My meditation of Him shall be sweet. Psalm 104 verse 34. He whose head gets above the clouds has his thoughts lifted high, as God in his eye is full of divine raptures, and cries out as Peter in the Transfiguration, Lord, it is good to be here. Holy thoughts are the dove we sent out of the ark of our souls, and they bring an olive branch of peace. Some complain that they have no joy in their lives, and truly no wonder when they are such strangers to heavenly contemplation. Would you have God give you comfort and never think of Him? Indeed, Israel had manna dropped into their tents, and they never thought of it. But God will not drop down this manna of heavenly joy on that soul which seldom or never thinks of Him. Would you have your spirits cheerful? Let your thoughts be heavenly. The higher the lark flies, the sweeter it sings. The higher a soul ascends in the thoughts of God, the sweeter joy it has. Point 10. Thoughts of God will turn to the best account. Thoughts spent on the world are often in vain. Some spend thoughts about laying up a portion for a child, and perhaps either it dies or lives to be a cross. Others beat their brains how to rise at court, and when royal favor has shone upon them, all of a sudden an eclipse comes about. The king's smile is turned into a frown, and then their thoughts are frustrated. How oft do men build castles in the air, but the thoughts of God will turn to a good account. They augment sanctification and bring satisfaction. My soul shall be satisfied as with marrow and fatness when I remember thee upon my bed and meditate on thee. Psalm 63, verse 5 and 6. The thoughts we have of God in the time of health will be a comfort to us in the time of sickness. Point 11. God thinks of us, and shall not we think of him? Shall we not think of him? The Lord thinketh upon me. Psalm 40, verse 17. God thinks on us every morning. His mercies are new every morning. Lamentations 3:23. He gives us night mercies. He rocks us every night asleep, so he giveth his beloved sleep. Psalm 127, verse 2. And if we wake, he gives songs in the night. Job 35:10. If God is thinking of us day and night, shall not we think of his name? How can we forget a friend who is ever mindful of us? How? I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace. Jeremiah 29:11. Though God be out of our sight, we are not out of his thoughts. Point 12. God will one day reckon with us for our thoughts. He will say, I gave you a cognitive faculty. What have you done with it? If God asks a covetous man, what have your sentiments been? Which way have your thoughts run? He will answer, to heap up riches. If God asks princes and emperors, how have you employed your thoughts? They will say, how by our scepter to beat down the power of godliness. What a dreadful account will these persons have to give at last. Not only men's actions, but their thoughts will accuse them. Romans 2, verse 15. Point 13. Our thoughts of God shall not be lost. God accepts the thought for the deed. David had a good thought come into his mind to build God a house, and God took it as kindly as if he had done it. Forasmuch as it was in thy heart to build an house for my name, thou didst well in that it was in thy heart. 2 Chronicles 6:8. When Christians have thoughts of promoting God's glory, they would do such good acts if it were in their power. Build hospitals, distribute justice, cut off offenders from the city of God. The Lord looks upon it as if they had done it, so that our thoughts of God are not lost. So let us think of God in a right manner. A good medicine may be spoiled in the making, so may a good duty be spoiled in the doing. Thoughts may be good for the matter of them, yet may be faulty in the manner. I shall show you first how thoughts of God may fail in their manner, then the right manner of thinking upon God. Point 1. How thoughts of God may fail in their manner. First, a man think of God, yet not intend his glory. Ye who had good thoughts come into his mind to destroy Baal worshippers, but his intent was to advance himself into the throne. Bad aims spoil good actions. Secondly, a man may have good thoughts, but they are forced. When one bleeds under God's afflicting hand, he may think of God, yet have no love to him. When he slew them, then they remembered that God was their rock and the high God their Redeemer. Nevertheless, they did flatter him with their mouths. Psalm 78, verse 34 to 36. These were good thoughts. but it was to pay God a compliment in order to get rid of the affliction. Thirdly, a man may have thoughts of God out of a design to stop the mouth of conscience. Conscience lashes the profane sinner. What? Are you so wicked as never to think of God who indulges you with so many favors? Hereupon he may have a few good thoughts, but they are irksome to him. This is not from a principle of conscience, but to quiet conscience. Fourthly, a man may think of God with horror. He thinks of God's sovereignty and dreads the thoughts of God. You see, one may think of God, yet these thoughts may become sinful. 2. The right manner of thinking upon God. First, our thoughts of God must be serious. Feathers swim on the surface, but gold sinks into the water. Feathery spirits have some floating thoughts, but good hearts sink deep in the thoughts of a deity. Secondly, our thoughts of God must be spiritual. Take heed of framing any gross conceits of God in your minds, representing him by the likeness of the creature. Ye saw no similitude, Deuteronomy 4:15. Conceive of God in Christ. We cannot see him any other way, as we cannot see the sun in the circle, but in the beams. The Godhead dwells in Christ's human nature. Colossians 2 verse 9. Think of God as a spirit full of immense glory, propitious to us through a mediator. Thirdly, our thoughts of God must be delightful. With what delight does a child think of his father? A gracious soul counts them the sweetest hours which are spent with God. Fourthly, our thoughts of God must be operative and also efficacious, leaving our hearts in a better tune. The thoughts of God's faithfulness must make us confide in him. The thoughts of God's holiness must make us conform to him. This is the right thinking on God, when it is influential, leaving us in a more heavenly frame. Now, the third use is direction. The text shows us how to have our thoughts frequently fixed upon God. 1. Begin the day with holy thoughts. When I awake, I am still with thee. Psalm 139, verse 18. God should have the first buddings of our thoughts. In the law, the Lord would have the first fruits offered him. Give God your virgin thoughts in the morning. What the vessel is first seasoned with, it keeps the relish of a long time after. The mind seasoned with good thoughts in the morning will keep the heart in a better state all the day after. If you would think, this is the second point, if you would think of God, take heed of hindrances. Turn away your eyes from beholding vanity. Psalm 119:37. Vain objects poison the imagination, lascivious pictures, and wanton talk leave bad impressions there. As far as you are able, call your thoughts off from the world. If worldly thoughts come crowding into your and our mind, good thoughts will be lost in the crowd. And then get a love for God and his ways. One cannot but think of that which he loves. Can a maid forget her ornaments? Jeremiah 2 verse 32. When she has not her jewel on her ear, she will have it in her thoughts. A person deeply in love cannot keep his thoughts off from the object he loves. The reason we think on God no more is because we love him no more. Let there be but one spark of love to God, and it will fly upward. In heavenly thoughts and prayers, by nature we have quicksilver hearts which cannot be made to fix on God, but by love. If you would think often on God, get an interest in him. This God is our God. Psalm 48:14. We think most upon that which is our own. If a man ride by handsome houses and gardens, he casts his eyes slightly upon them. But let him have a house of his own, and his thoughts dwell in it. Why do men think no more of God? Because God and they are strangers. Let a man's interest in God be cleared, and he will not be able to keep his thoughts off from God. And with this said, I have come to the end of chapter 8. And the next time we will start with the second part of this study, the good effects of godliness, it's called. And that will be chapter 9. And with this said, I have come to the end of this chapter. So, thank you for listening, and God bless you.